in town, and I thought having a law degree, I think, is really helpful because, first of all, I think lawyers are fairly organized. You can juggle a lot of things at once. And I started running, kind of put together a group of people that I knew in town, and it was kind of interesting that just like in like national politics, you kind of get pegged. You get pegged in a place, and I was pegged as like the mother, the housewife, kind of with the 2 kids, and it ended up that the campaign that I had was really quite organized, and we ended up topping the ticket. I ended up topping the ticket, and the person I ran against was the 30-year incumbent, and I ran against other people. It was 5 of us. I think there were 5 or 6 of us for 2 spots, and he ended up not getting reelected. And the headline in the Arlington Advocate, after they had pegged me as like this homemaker type person, which really annoyed me because here I'm a lawyer, I was working, I was juggling 2 small children, plus working, plus running this campaign, and they were pegging me as like the housewife. The headline was something like, "Await a machine, tops ticket," and it was really it was funny, but it was annoying to me at the same time. So anyway, that's some of my background, but what I wanted to kind of focus on was that, one of the role of the school committee member in Massachusetts is you write policy for the district, you review and approve the budget, and then you also hire and supervise, and then if you have to, you fire the superintendent. So those are really your three big jobs as a school committee member in Massachusetts. And in Arlington, there's very little racial diversity, but there is some diversity in economics and in a little bit of ethnic diversity. And I suppose that's how I got to know Kay, because we did make some changes in Arlington. We hired a superintendent who is a little bit different. He didn't come up through the ranks of how superintendents normally get there. He made some good changes because Arlington was really, we had been cited for special education, that we weren't following the procedures, and I think our special education students were really being left behind. And I think that's where we started to close some of the achievement gap, really opening up education for special education students. And we brought in this new superintendent that really did some remarkable things. And I guess I'll close by saying that one of the things I took away from being in the school committee was that change is very, very, very slow and very difficult, and it happens in increments. But and I think it has to happen within. It has to come from within your own system, and it is difficult, but it does happen. And I would encourage any. I think attorneys and lawyers are great people to be on the school committee. You can really get to the root of the issue, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Next we'll hear from Mayor Lane.
Thank you. I think the overview of this panel is why run, if you're aware of why run, why get involved, why become a public opinion formulator, how can you impact your community, and how can you bring about hopefully constructive and positive change. So I will just give you my quick overview on that and then wade into some of the educational issues. When I originally started as a young person in Washington, after I completed college, I went to law school in Washington and worked on the Capitol for a while for Hubert Humphrey, and then went to the Democratic National Committee for a period of time, an interesting period of time, very, very important period of time, probably a period of time if you're within my age group at all, you realize that if you went to law school, you were going to law school because you wanted to change the world, you wanted to do something to contribute to society in many cases. And it was during this period of time that I realized that if you do want to make an impact, it probably makes more sense to get out into a community than it would be to stay in Washington. You'd either be on the Hill, you'd be a lobbyist, or you'd be part of an industry. So I left Washington in 1978 and went up to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And at that time, my wife was about to have our first child. We have 3, and was very excited about going to their new hometown and to be our adopted hometown. And when I first went to New Bedford, it was a very interesting city, certainly a knit and gritty type of city, but it was a New England type of city. So it had, a lot of parochialism and closed on Wednesdays for the gentry to go out sailing or golfing. I mean, it was a very, it was more like 1900 than from 1978 to today. During the time I was in New Bedford, you raise your kids, and as you raise your children, you're involved with them in every activity you can be involved in, hopefully as a parent who's trying to be a good parent, and you're also involved with their friends. And at a certain point, there's a blur, a line where their friends are as important to you as your own kids, in a perhaps in a little different way, certainly, but you want to see the success of the children, and you get involved in the schools, and I was very happy to do that. At the same time, I was practicing law and building a practice in New Bedford, which was something that allowed me to connect with a tremendous number of families in the city. Our practice started around working families, around union members. And the firm that I joined when I first went in there represented most unions to the south of Boston and to the east of Providence. So I got to know the people, I got to know the kids, I got to understand the educational challenges in the city. The demographics of the city, though, since 1978 have changed dramatically. And they've changed dramatically, quite frankly, from my perspective, for the better. Because I love a diverse, cosmopolitan, electric-driven type of society. So our population shift was one that we began to welcome more and more people in from around the world in New Bedford. With that backdrop, as my kids got older, I got more involved in different activities, and we spent an awful lot of time, my wife and I, doing something that we really enjoyed, and I hope to get back to as soon as I can, and that was contributing and sponsoring from a very, middle-class perspective, but using a fairly significant amount of money when you realize that a $250 or $500 contribution to a nonprofit is like a $10,000 governmental expenditure at any given time, because they take that money and they build it and they grow it. It's like planting a seed. So we began contributing throughout the city to youth activities back in the early 90s, right through for that decade. And every team we could find, every academic type of scholarship, anything that we could possibly get involved in, we did. And felt great about it. And it also not only allowed us to continue to support our own kids, but had, direct involvement. And it also, I can tell you this now, as every attorney here knows, it certainly is not counterproductive if you're building a law practice to be involved in your community and to be involved in a charitable way in the community. And then came 2000, approximately 1998 to 2004, the city began to change, not only from a atmosphere standpoint, but also we began to have some real problems with youth violence. And youth violence from the standpoint of where when we were younger, there were always conflicts, and hopefully they'd be worked out, by holding someone's head like this and saying, please separate, break, and let's talk this through. But the youth violence I'm talking about began to manifest itself in horrific injuries and then actually murders, which is something completely foreign to anything that we had experienced before. And many, many urban areas in this country experience it. And we could do, I'm sure Kay, who I greatly appreciate asking to be here, Kay can set up another conference in Boston about illegal gun violence, and we will absolutely have our heads spinning when we realize this is, other than the gap achievement issue, which is now beginning to be fully exposed, the individual gun violence around the country is something that is unparalleled in our history at this point. So, New Bedford began to suffer from a terrible, terrible epidemic of gun violence and murders. Now, I'd been in the DA's office as a special for 12 years when I first started. I knew a little bit about law enforcement, and I also knew that maybe some cases you can't stop a crime, but you got to be able to apprehend the accused and then present them to the justice system for a determination. We weren't getting to that point because no one was speaking. And what was happening in the community, people were acting like we're better off not talking about it, even as they grieve like no one has ever grieved before. And then the administration, the mayor's office, was basically telling our community, if it was not your child, if it did not happen in your neighborhood, just keep walking, don't worry about it. This will all come out in the wash, but don't worry. And with that backdrop, and seeing kids' names who I knew at one point or another, I had handed a trophy or handed a scholarship to, I decided to get involved in the mayor's race in 2005. Now, it was pretty simple. When I was in Washington, I worked at the DNC, so I knew how you ran a campaign and had been involved in many campaigns, but had never thought ever that I would be a candidate. So what happened in essence was, if you're motivated, if you're driven, if you're running for the right reason, you will run an effective campaign. If you're running to make, for a job title, you don't need it. You're already either mom, dad, attorney. You don't brother, sister, son, daughter. You don't need the title. It is very serious business in 2012. If you're going to run for election, you have to do it for the right reasons if you're an attorney. Second thing is, if you think that it is Patrick will tell you, beyond even a shadow of a doubt, if you think it's a lucrative career to get into, forget that too. It is your chance to be involved in the Peace Corps. It's your chance to go out and be a volunteer for a period of time. So with that decision being made, I went out and ran. I ran 6 weeks before the primary, and I thought I was going to drive the debate. In fact, at the firm, I basically said, don't worry about it. I've got to go do this so that people understand that you can't just, wish away what's happening in the city. People have to come together and solve these problems. And I won the primary. And then when I won the primary, I was pretty certain. I'll just give you an example. When I won the primary, my strategy then was to challenge the incumbent to 6 more debates in every ward in the city, because I knew that we had tremendous momentum. And rather than saying, well, I won the primary, so I'm going to sit back now and see if they can knock me out, so we're going to drive this as hard as we can. And what I was able to do was bring the city together around some very basic concepts. One was education, which meant every kid in that city was treasured, had to be respected, and had to become the greatest at whatever they could be. No failures. Everyone had to be involved in this community, in this society. The other thing was public safety, and obviously safe streets. You can't do anything without safe streets, safe schools. And then the next one was neighborhood revitalization. We need, if houses are being painted in my neighborhood, they got to be painted in yours, and we got to figure out how to do it, because there's nothing worse. We have to have a semblance of a common denominator here, which means that valuing our families, valuing where we live, the environment in which we live, and valuing the education we have in schools. And I said, if we can do that, public safety, education, and neighborhood revitalization, we will bring economic development back to the city. And that's exactly what we did. Other than Boston, for the 6 years that I was mayor, during the period of time of the Great Recession, we were the second highest new growth in the state. We have worked very, very hard, but it is something that you have to throw yourself into completely. Now, the advantage I had as mayor of the city of New Bedford was I was also the ex officio